You are watching the Directing Animation Livecast, hosted by me, Scott Weiser. I've worked as either a director or animator on more than 30 productions, both short and feature length, and my favorite projects have been these books, which I wrote, illustrated, and pitched at several studios as a feature film. Actually, our guest today, Brenda Gilbert, I pitched these projects at her studio, which was a wonderful experience. It was wonderful to be an animator there, and I'm very pleased to have you today, Brenda, on our show. Go ahead and say hello. And
Hello, and thank you for having me on the show, Scott. I'm honored, very honored.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. So I hope it's okay if we take care of a few laundry items. I actually am going to be hosting or moderating a couple panels at the CTNX, the Cartoon Talent Networking Expo, the animation expo in the industry. And so they gave me some free tickets that I can share with audience members. I have 8 one-day passes, they're just floor passes, and then I have 2 4-day passes. The way that our viewers can enter to win those passes is by subscribing to the channel and by commenting on this video. So, and I look forward to responding to your comments. I always love interacting with our audience members. So, Brenda, as a bit of an introduction for you, you can add anything that you'd like to add to this. Brenda co-founded Braun Studios. She's the BR in Braun, and unless I'm wrong, that's what I'm guessing. But
Scott.
Braun produces not only live-action features, they also produce animated features, and they have a really nice blend going on there. I worked there as an animator, and it was a wonderful environment, wonderful place to be. Is there anything else you'd like to add to your intro there?
No, that was beautifully done, Scott. Thank you so much.
Great. Awesome. So one of the reasons I've created this show is to create conversations that will help the industry become a better place and help artists and directors be able to create better productions for their artists. And obviously I want to direct a feature as well. I remember back at BRON having a conversation with Cam Dill and Josh, and she talked about how she observed you for quite a long time and how you'd always make decisions based on how they affected people. And I wanted to have a conversation about that and hear more about your philosophy behind that.
Mm-hmm. It was interesting when I actually did the pre-interview with Cam, who's our Senior Vice President for Human Resources. As I said, the people are the essence, the crew are the essence of our studio and for each project. And I don't like politics. I don't like bureaucracy. Yeah. It's you know, we're not a standard studio system where there is this sort of delineated hierarchy. Obviously, you have to have leads and supervisors and things like that to move things along in terms of deadlines and quotas. But the reality is everybody contributes, and it's really, really important to understand that whether you're a production assistant, whether you're a lead, or if you're an animation supervisor or an executive within a company, I think that's what people forget about. And even if it's the custodian that's cleaning up after you or cleaning up after you in the kitchen. And when I was doing this pre-interview with Cam, I had said to her is that regardless of who you are and what your experience is that you have to check your ego at the door, because it's really the people. Again, I want to really emphasize this, as the people is what makes the studio, that contributes to the overall culture within the studio, and the intimacy and the long hours that are worked are so important in terms of everybody working together in such a manner, and it's such a collaborative environment. So it's really, really, really important not to negate from everyone's contribution.
And that's a really refreshing attitude. I heard a business owner one time that said, your greatest problem as a business owner is your people. And that really rubbed me the wrong way. I thought, yeah, you're going to have problems when you're working with people, but they're your greatest asset. And if you think of them as a problem, then you suddenly treat them differently.
It's true.
Yeah.
They're not a problem. If anything, they're the solution.
Yeah. What is a good example of a situation where you had a problem to solve where it could have affected people negatively, and but it also there were other factors that also, you were trying to weigh them, and you made the decision based on people?
Well, The thing is, as an owner,
Yeah.
you do management and emotional management as well. And the key to that in any leadership position is that not to have an emotional reaction to something, also taking a step back and having objectivity and really hearing both sides of the stories, not just necessarily having an opinion that you hear from one person. And how you resolve it is think about, okay, if there's a problem of some sort and somebody has a complaint, they're coming to you with a complaint, is asking them the question also. So the objectivity, number one, but also asking the person that's having the complaint is, what do you think we should do here? What do you foresee as a solution? And it's not firing or terminating a person, but just really figuring it out and making sure that they're part of the solution, as opposed to just bring problem to you. So
Yeah.
it takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot, especially when there's, our environment, our industry is very stressful. So
Yeah.
I understand people can get angry and upset and things like that. But also taking the time to listen to people, which is really key.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. There's a lot of stuff there too that I'd like to unpack. You talked to, I think that really connects to what you said earlier, where you don't really like politics or bureaucracy. And I think what happens in those kinds of environments is it's like people are left out of the room. They're left out of the conversation. Where it sounds like what you like to do is bring people into the conversation and make sure all the voices are heard before you make a decision. Is that what I heard? Is that correct?
Absolutely. And I think that, just bringing people to the table is very, very important, making sure that, your table is not confined to a square, but you can have extensions to that table where people feel that they have a place to sit at. So you can add not only extend that table, but also add chairs at that table.
Yeah.
So people feel that they have that voice at the table and that they're able to communicate, their opinions, their perspectives, their feedback.
Yeah. Well, it is very, very evident throughout your company as well. I remember that I had Vanishing Ink, hold it up, this book, sitting on my desk there at BRON. And I think it was Joe Parton came by and he saw it and he said, "Oh, you should pitch that with us." I didn't even have to ask. It was remarkable to me that actually happened, because at the other studios I pitched at, I had to ask. And then Adam Wood came by and said, "Hey, is that your project? You should pitch with us." It was like both. And that happened within, I think, the first week of me being there. And it just was a very different feeling from the other studios I've been at. And I think other studios will even say, like, your people are your greatest asset, but and everybody from the janitor to the accountant needs to have feedback on the film, but I hardly ever see it in practice the way I saw it at BRON. So
yeah, it's important not just to say something, but actually, do something about it and practice it. I think that's key. Is a lot of people will talk about things, but it's important to give people opportunities, to give them platforms, because artists, particularly in our industry, they need to be stimulated all the time, and they have all great ideas. They really do.
They do. Yeah. Yeah, with soccer and foosball tables and parties and man, I loved BRON. It was so great.
And we have ping pong tables too.
Oh yes, there's a ping pong table. I remember that. And coffee machines that run all day.
That's right. And
you can make hot chocolate in them too, so you can make all kinds of different variety of drinks.
That's right. Which the first week we had those machines wasn't so good because I was having a lot of lattes and hot chocolate. So.
I know. I realized that I had an addiction to candy when I kept running into the same person at the candy cabinet. And then that person made a lunch, like they forgot their lunch one day and they just filled a bowl with candy and just ate it. It was a great memory. So yeah, back on the serious matters. I also liked that you said that it takes a lot of emotional investment to do something like that. When I left BRON, I became a creative director at a company where I was helping them to build a creative team. And it wasn't really in animation, so I'm glad to be back in animation now. Yes. But it was very interesting that when a problem came up, I found myself calling maybe 4 people to kind of get different angles. And it is very exhausting. How are you able to do that? Because I had a team of about 10 people. How are you able to do that when you have 200 employees or more?
I think that, I always know how important people are to me that are working within BRON. And I have time for that. Like, I don't think that
You just say that. I have time for that.
well, you don't. The thing is, you don't say I don't have time,
Right.
and you don't feel that it's going to consume you, because I'm also a problem solver, and I think that just being open-minded and listening to people. Again, I know I may be redundant in our conversation today. Is how I deal with it is just having the patience to listen to people, because you never know also what can happen from some of these conversations, and it doesn't have to sort of stem from a complaint. It can be advice, it can be a new perspective, it can be feedback.
Yeah. That's great. I love that. Okay, so on the subject of producing, how much producing do you actually do?
On the animation side, more so. On the live action side, it's a little bit difficult. I try to get to our live action sets at least once or twice during the duration of the shoot. It just depends on where we're filming in the world. So to answer your question, I mean, I guess from one perspective, it's a lot, because we're already, in production on a full-length feature film. Yeah. And on the other side is we're churning out a lot on the live action side of things. And as you know, Scott, is production pipelines for live action versus animation are essentially, like, for us, it's about like 35 to 1. So 35
live action projects to 1 animated feature?
Absolutely. And that's both on the producing and executive producing side of things. So trying to do more producing, it's just that there's only so many hours in a day.
Yeah. Well, and producing at the animation level is really what we're here to talk about. So I'm glad that's where you do most of your work. Yeah. So as a producer, what are the most difficult challenges that you have? The kind of the pain points, the things that are difficult. And then the second part to that question would be, how can a director help to fill in the gaps and do the work that needs to be done so that you can do the work you need to do?
It's interesting, because as a producer and as a studio owner, you want to make sure that things are on time. Deadlines are met, quotas are met, and you also want to make sure that things are within budget.
Yes.
And as we know. Yes. And so in terms of a director helping with that, is we have to, obviously have conversations with the director and say to them, him or her, say to them that, hey, you realize that if we have a creative vision, or you have a creative vision, that sometimes when you make changes, that they can have implications financially, downstream and otherwise. And so that's one part of it, is making sure that the director understands that if they want to change things along the way, that they sometimes aren't also quick solves, and also having the financial implications. But the other thing is, a good director also knows how to communicate creative decisions, creative vision to the crew. And you can't essentially assemble, a crew of 120, 150, 200 or whatever it may be all the time. But, making sure that the leads understand what's going on. If there are changes to be made, understanding where those changes are coming from, what it's stemming from, how the story has to change slightly, or even making a change in terms of the talent that are attached to particular projects. So I think and also, again, being wary that there are deadlines and quotas and bids that have to be met. So I think that's really important. So, but a good producer and a good director have to have open communication as well, and work together.
How often are you communicating with the director?
Quite candidly, not as much as I would like to. Between traveling back and forth to LA, we have an office in Los Angeles that has almost 30 people there right now, and just busyness of life and things like that. So I should be quite candidly communicating more with the director. And that's why you have a few other producers also there that are in Canada on site. And can do that. But you're also, I'm communicating with our producer that resides on the island.
Awesome.
Thank you, Brian.
Well, and I appreciate you being very candid. At the same time, it does harken back to your point that you have you have to have very clear communication, ability to clearly communicate something, and sometimes having that limited amount of time amplifies your need to communicate it very clearly. So maybe that's actually a benefit to you. I'm not sure, but but yeah. Okay, awesome. So let me see. I actually emailed Brenda the questions beforehand, and we don't need to get into the specifics of financing a film. So I rephrased the question. If you still have an issue with this question, we can pull back a little bit and then reformulate it. I'm perfectly fine with that. So it is so difficult to get one movie funded, as I found. I've been pitching at several studios. I've pitched with investors. I've tried several different angles of getting a film funded. And BRON has, funded over 50. How many? What's your number now?
It's a little bit more than that. We have a slate of deals, a slate of movies with Warner Brothers, MGM, and Lionsgate. So if you don't mind, Scott, I'll just explain a little bit. So we reorganized the company a couple of years ago. So it's BRON Media Corp as the parent company, and the subsidiaries are BRON Animation for animation, Braun Studios for live action content, and BRON Creative, which is our financing arm, where we don't take a producerial role. And we take we're executive producers on it, and that's where our slate of movies with the different studios also are under that umbrella of BRON Creative.
And that's where something like Addams Family would tie in, correct?
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So the second part of that question is, what makes a film project worth it for you and worth it for BRON to produce it?
Oh my goodness! It starts with the story.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that it's compelling, that can resonate with audiences, that it can travel. There's some universality in terms of the themes that it has. That's what's really, really important. Also, sometimes when a story or a project is pitched to us, is sometimes there's wonderful writers and directors already attached to it that you want to work and collaborate with, or there's actors that are already attached, and just their vision and how they're not just their buy-in, but just how passionate they feel about something. And also, we don't take any unsolicited scripts, but we sometimes do things with other co-producing partners time and time again, just because the relationship is great. We have trust in them. We also have trust in the types of projects that they want to do. And also, we do that with talent. So we've done this 3 times with Jason Reitman as well, in terms of the projects that, so with Tully, the front runner, and also with Ghostbusters as well.
Interesting. Oh, great. What makes it worth it? Because so sometimes it seems like, at least the word on the street is, it seems like you have films that have a really great story that never get off the ground. And part of that is because, now this is the word on the street, you can correct it if it's wrong, but it seems like the film industry right now is focusing highly on marketability. And so how do you reconcile the great story with the marketability? And
sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Oh, no, go ahead. Yeah, that's a good enough question.
I'm sure you're having more questions going. I can see it. I can see the wheels spinning right now.
They are spinning.
You're right. In terms of the marketability, it's also a different place than it was 10 years ago when we officially opened up shop in October of 2010. And right now, which Scott, you may not know, is we do have a marketing department that resides in Los Angeles. So we have a chief marketing officer, we have a VP of marketing, we have a VP of social media, and we have a coordinator there. The reality is, some of these stories really need to have the visibility that it deserves, and so making sure that marketing isn't an afterthought for these particular films. And when I said, and I alluded to the marketplace changing, is that the traditional way of doing things in the independent film space was to roll that die, take them out to festivals, and sell them there. Now 10 years ago, maybe that would have been right, but we didn't have the prominence of all these different platforms that we do right now. And also the reality is consumers are wanting short form content as well. So thinking about all those things, I swayed a little bit in terms of your question with marketability. But to answer your question, is we do have in-house marketing department, and making sure that it's, it's first and foremost in terms of how we want to get the messaging out. And also, if we want to make an awards play and things like that, or whether we want to have it in festivals or doing submissions and things like that. So yeah, it's really, really important. And also just having advocates, whether that's the talent that's attached to the show or other partners, I think is also really, really important.
Well, that is a lot of great information. And I like actually the way you took it from the beginning when you started answering the question, where you talked about how you need to know the marketing strategy right from the beginning. And I actually have been encountering this with a lot of my friends who, there was one example where I heard this secondhand. He is a friend of mine, but I heard it from another friend. But he's talking about how he's pitching with Amazon, and Amazon wanted a whole marketing plan along with a pitch. And so it does seem like that is actually a very important thing for people like me who are creating original pitches, to actually have a marketing plan in mind from the pitch.
And I don't think it has to be a detailed one. It's just more so is, what is your vision for that particular project? What are you trying to accomplish? So a lot of times when projects are pitched to us, is I say, what are your goals with this project? And also, who is your target audience? Do you want this to be specifically in North America? Do you want it to be more adult skewed? Do you want it to be more towards preschoolers? What do you actually want to do with this? And how do you want it to resonate with audiences?
Cool. Well, that's great. So kind of high level. Not in the nitty gritty, but just a high level.
But you could,
but clear.
And also just making sure that you do your research as well as what else is out in the marketplace right now, whether it's something that is in the theaters or whether it's on one of the platforms.
Cool. Fun. That's fun. And you know how to play all of those. You've done the festival route, you've done the feature film route, you've done Netflix. You have Willoughbys coming out on Netflix, and which looks like such a fun and unique project, and I'm excited to see that one. When does that come out?
That's going to come out next year sometime.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to that one for sure. So what do you think the biggest thing a producer and director can do to impact the industry for the best, to make it a better place to work?
I absolutely, first and foremost, think that we should lead by example. I think even any lead in a company, any executive, really, really needs to be able to do that and have respect. Mutual respect is very, very important to me. Also being empathetic. We also talked a little earlier about willing to listen to people and being receptive to feedback. And also what's really, really important also is to have accountability. So we all know that things aren't going to go in the way that we want all the time. The pathway is not always straight and narrow. There's going to be different detours. There's going to be different modes of transportation. If things don't go well, then we need to own up and say, okay, it didn't go well. We need to do things maybe differently, or figure out a different plan, or whatever it may be. And also, it's so important to let your crew know how much you appreciate them, to say thank you, to say a job well done, especially if there were some difficulties in terms of getting some quotas out and deadlines met. A lot of people think that it has to be monetary, but I feel, and this is very subjective on my part, that intrinsic rewards, in terms of showing appreciation by saying thank you, is much more important than extrinsic. Of course, extrinsic helps in terms of helping with overhead and things like that. But a simple thank you is so important.
Yeah, well, in our society where people can just kind of go where they want now, the job market has just changed over the years, where you only spend about 2 years at the most at a company. I was only able to spend 6 months at BRON, which again was kind of unfortunate, but it was wonderful I was there. But it seems like the reason that people go is more a feeling. It's more intrinsic. Yes, they want to be paid a certain amount of money, but sometimes it is about the project. It is about, this environment is really good, and I've heard it's a good place. And when companies are bad to work for, that news travels as well. Yeah.
It's true.
And people get warnings and they say, be careful when you work at that company, and, you know, just kind of manage this and manage that. That's what happens among us artists. So yeah, interesting. I really like that though. I love the idea of leading out by example as well. And I do have a little bit of a pushback inside of me, and I'll kind of go into it, and you can tell me what you think about it. But it seems to me, when I worked at all the studios, when I worked and did overtime, so at my first studio I worked at, it was at Rhythm and Hughes, and somebody said, yeah, overtime doesn't actually make us faster. And I thought, that's a weird thing to say. You're working more, how would it not make you faster? But I observed with how my energy works, if I worked overtime, I actually started slowing down. And so I was able to, as an artist, find this sweet spot where I didn't have to really do overtime. And sometimes I would just to have camaraderie with the team. But when I did that, I actually would slow down the next day. But I was still one of the highest on output. So to me as a director, I don't know if I want to ask people to do overtime. And I've often heard that, you know, lead out by example. I've often heard that used with directors saying, yeah, I have to work overtime because my crew's working overtime, but I don't know that I really want to do that. What do you think about that?
You know, it's interesting that you said that. And one of the things is, you know, I've been in a management position for over 20 years right now.
Yeah.
And I have to always remember that not everybody works in the same way that I do, meaning that not everybody can work 8 hours straight or 10 hours straight and doing that overtime that's necessary, or can people perceive as necessary, I should say. And so, I mean, I mix. Some people can be productive. It's just depending on the capacity, and some people aren't. For me, is, you know, I can work quite a lot straight, but then you also have to have that reprieve and downtime.
Some white space. Yeah.
We have to do that as human beings, and just making sure that we have outlets for stress and things like that. So is it necessary? It depends on the situation. Also, it depends on the person, whether they have the capacity to do so. So sometimes things that are perceived as overtime doesn't necessarily mean that, even if an individual, myself included, is working or at the studio for 12 or 14 hours, it doesn't mean that I'm consistently working and looking at my screen that whole time.
Yes.
There's times that I'm on the telephone taking a call, or I go outside and I take a walk, or I go and have lunch and things like that. And it could, if overtime, it depends on what the definition of overtime is spending 12 hours in front of the screen, or is it 12 hours at the studio? Yeah.
That's a very good point. Thank you. So if you were, now we talked beforehand about my efforts, and I'm, you know, building pitch after pitch. Sometimes it's a book. Sometimes I do have some pitches that aren't books. And what advice would you give to somebody at my level who's done directing, wants to direct a feature? What advice would you give to someone like me on how to get to a point where I can direct an original feature film?
I think is, you know, Scott, you've been in the industry for a little while, is, you know, talk to people in the industry, talk to people that have had similar journey to what you're aspiring to do.
Yeah.
And from multiple studios, meaning is look at studios that are service providers, content providers, talk to creatives that have done things individually and how they've been able to not just gain the momentum, but also to sustain what they're trying to do and aspiring to do.
Yeah.
Doing research otherwise as well, in terms of, okay, so I have this book here, I want to direct it, and how am I going to go about doing that? Is, okay, I've done the research, I talked to people and whatever else, but the research meaning that I've looked on things online, and there's one thing that you and I talked about earlier, is the volatility of our industries. You know, there's no surefire way of succeeding, and success is obviously subjective as well.
Yeah.
Because some people are very happy, you know, in terms of doing a 9-to-5 job and that's it, and they don't want a leadership role, and they're very happy and they're very content. Others, like yourself, want to be a director, and you are very well accomplished as well. You have multiple things on the go, and I don't know how you do it and juggle what you do in terms of the books that you have out there too. So the advice that I can give you is, one is talk to people in the industry, people that you worked with before, people people that you trust in as well that can give you honest, genuine answers, doing the research and looking at other people's sort of trajectory in their careers, how they've done that. Also making sure that if you're going to pitch something and you want to be directing, is making sure that you highlight your skills, your assets, your experience, your expertise first and foremost, and making sure that when you do have a deck of any sort in terms of a presentation, that it's as thorough as it can be.
Yeah. I like, boy, what do I ask from that? That was really good. Yeah, so maybe this is a question that I just reach out to you later and I ask what all needs to go into a pitch deck. Because I have pitch decks for some of the projects. There's some that it just won't, like there's one that it won't work as a book. It's a musical. It is a musical and it just will only work as a musical. And so it's like, I can't ever do this one as a book. So what I did for that one was a pitch deck. And it was a little tricky for us to know exactly what needed to go into the pitch deck. We have a lot of research in there about like how much the film would cost versus how much it can make, how much other films in a comparable zone and a comparable type, how much they make in comparison with our production. And then, yes, the different assets that we have and the actual story that we want to tell and kind of the process that we would take the investors through and that sort of thing. Is there anything else that you would, beside that list, that you would think would need to go in there?
No, I think that's great. You know what I like, because I'm such a visual person, is I love visual concepts.
Yeah.
I like, you know, and I like things to look sort of stimulating in terms of the creativity and, you know, just and also just in terms of the vision of whether it would be 2D or whether it would be a CG or a blend of both. And, you know, even talking about later on in post in terms of effects and things like that, what are you thinking about and doing? And also, because I'm not technically savvy, is just understanding what type of technical pipeline is going to be used, whether it's a game engine pipeline or whether it's a traditional pipeline for full-length theatrical film too. So I mean that's getting a bit into the minutia. But
it's a good minutia though.
Well, what I've learned is that the game engine pipeline is quite efficient in terms of time and the number of people that need to be on a particular project, which I didn't know about.
Yeah.
And the quality bar may not get to the same point as some of the major studios out there, but it's pretty darn close, and particularly if it's for TV.
And getting better, for sure.
It's even better. So just really understanding a little bit, and again, asking people.
Yeah.
People are often willing to help, even if it's just in an email, it's a few lines, and then you can also say that if you don't have the time to, you know, and I understand that you're busy, given that you're working on, you know, whatever project it is can you refer me to somebody else that has some knowledge, that has some expertise on this?
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you did mention because with this particular pitch deck that I'm talking about, I haven't decided whether it's going to be 2D or CG, because I'm trying to figure out what kind of budget we can actually get.
Yeah.
And so I thought maybe budget would indicate that. Fortunately, I've worked in games, feature film, in CG, and I have worked in 2D. And so I have run the gamut, so I do understand the workflows that are required.
Yeah.
So should I specify in the pitch deck whether I want it to be 2D or CG, or is that important?
Well, it depends on who you're pitching to. So if you're trying to raise financing for a film, and you say, I want $10 million as opposed to $500,000, I'm arbitrarily throwing out numbers, you know, you look at, obviously there's more factors involved, is you say, okay, $10 million seems like a lot of money, but how have you brought it down to $500,000? And then you say X, Y, and Z, and then also I can have more efficiencies in terms of workflow and whatever it may be. So, yeah, that's just a way of looking at it. I don't think necessarily you have to have such a detailed presentation to include that, but sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't, depending on who you're pitching to and what you're trying to pitch. What are you trying to get from this particular pitch?
Yeah, well, that's all very useful. Very useful to know. So now we're going to have a segment we'll always do on the show. It's called the Get Wiser Moment. And someday there will be a jingle. I practiced a couple, but I don't like how they sound. And I can sing, but I'm not going to right now. Someday we'll have some music for it. But so what moral responsibility, if any, in terms of story, actually, in terms of messaging, what moral responsibility, if any, does a director have to the world culture?
I think as a director and a producer, because traditionally BRON has been a content provider, so we are responsible for the content that we are putting out there and people are consuming, is, this is my subjective opinion.
That's okay, and that's what this is meant to be. We've had some people get religious in this topic. We've had some people get philosophical on this topic. It's up to you. We really want to hear what you have to say.
For me, and it's what's really, really important to me is making sure that there's representation. And I know that's sort of broad, and that doesn't necessarily just mean to have more females in our animated projects, but also to look at young people and have them in roles that traditionally you wouldn't see, and if there's a moral to the story. So for instance, if they're dealing with bullying or self-esteem, is showing them how they can overcome this in a way that's sometimes not conscious. I think that's really important, but the representation also could have to do with ethnic groups. It can have to do with people that don't have access to resources, whether that's poverty or education, that obviously is attributed from not having enough money to get a good education or access to money that could help them in some capacity. I think that also a responsibility for me is that themes that can travel, meaning that there's a universality to those themes. So it's not just necessarily North American themes, but we also look at things that affect other places in the world. And I think that's my responsibility. That's what I would like to do. So the two things is universality in terms of themes, more representation, having more inclusion, and also having stories out there that don't have that predictability, that make people think, and to have a conversation that continues well beyond the medium that it is consumed on.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And it does seem, now I'm not sure about this, but it seems to me that nowadays a lot of the films coming out, it's like a commentary on society now, right? Where you look at these films and these stories, like the story of Merlin, the magician, or the story of Robin Hood, or the story of, all these films that just, the story of The Joker, which is a film that you helped produce as well, that's now in theaters, So there's these stories that just catch on, and they just keep coming back because there is a universality to it. And it seems to me that if you could look past what's going on in society just a little bit, I mean, it is important to know what's going on in society. It is important to figure out solutions to that. But it seems like everybody's doing that. It seems like there's something a lot more human and a lot more beneath the surface that we can touch on. What do you think of that? Am I way off in my thinking, or is it something that resonates with you?
You think that, to answer your question, is things a lot more people are doing that, is what you're saying?
Yeah, it seems like everybody's, a lot of the content that's coming out right now is commentary on societal issues now, where the stories that will last are the ones that have something on a deeper level, that there's more universality to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot more people are doing it because it has been problematic and nobody wanted to talk about it before.
Yeah.
So we're bringing it to light. We're making sure that people understand that these are real-time issues and they're not going to go away. It's important to identify that, but also to have, or to give people a better understanding that these are the reasons sometimes where people act in a certain way or conduct themselves in a certain way. It's not necessarily all their fault. Maybe it has to do something with their social environment. Maybe it has something to do with mental illness. There's a lot of different factors that come into play. And my hope is that it will be long and withstanding in terms of these types of projects that people will put out there to the world, just so that people to help people and to talk about things and to do something is really, really important. And if you can see it on screen, I think that's all the much better. And it doesn't have to be preachy. It doesn't have to be in your face.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important, especially with our young people who will turn off really quickly if it ends up being like it's a lecture of some sort.
Yeah.
So my hope is that, you know, people do it and do it in a creative way whereby people don't feel like, okay, oh my God, it's the same thing over and over again. It would be very interesting to see how people are clever in terms of getting that out there and making sure that it resonates and it resides for a long time. Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that the way you do it without being preachy is dramatizing it. Don't have your characters saying the things you need to say to the world. Have the drama actually play it out.
Yes.
Have it demonstrate, and have it demonstrate both sides of the arguments in a balanced way, so that you're going to come to a conclusion, but maybe there's other things. And like you said that earlier, that you want people to be talking about the story and the concepts in the story long after they saw the film.
Absolutely. And also just to make sure that, not just to make sure, but just it would be great if there is a resolution of some sort at the end of a movie or an end of some form of content and things like that, just because we want people to have hope. And then that's what's really, really important. And we want to empower them, and we want to inspire them, and we want to support them. And I think that is first and foremost, particularly with our young people that can lose hope really quickly and don't feel like they have that support, whether it's from their peers, whether it's from their parents, whether it's from their teachers, or the greater society as a whole. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I even think the resolution doesn't always have to be a happy ending, right? So we have Sunset Boulevard was a film that obviously, from the beginning it's going to have a sad ending. And I remember watching that film and sitting down, and I think I mentioned this on a former podcast. I think I mentioned this on the first episode, but it was interesting that I sat down with my wife and I said, I need to make some changes. And I almost couldn't articulate it. We had to have this whole conversation. It took me a while to even figure out what that film was saying to me, but I knew that there was a message there that was going to change my life, and that was quite a remarkable thing. It's a black and white film. It's not dazzling like the new films coming out nowadays, and yet it packed a punch. So
yeah, well, I think you and I talked earlier about it does not have to be dazzling.
Right. Yeah.
People that are watching these things don't necessarily, just because they're so intelligent, they're so savvy, they need to see something that's genuine, that feels real, that they can connect to. I think that's also very, very important. So in terms of messaging, it doesn't have to be flashy and sparkly and whatever else. And as pretty as things are out there, we want to make sure that it can be super clean, it can be super simple. You can have messaging in various different formats. So I think that's important. And also, Scott, what's also important is possibly with some of these projects, and what I'm going to be doing and working hard towards is having accompanying pieces or foundational support or charitable support with some of these projects as well, because sometimes people feel compelled to help. So it's not necessarily people going, oh yeah, that's me and I need help, but also how people can help. And so sometimes they don't know where to help after a movie is finished or a show is finished.
Well, great. Well, thank you. It's been such a pleasure. Your answers are wonderful and insightful, and I think I have to listen to this over again to get everything out of it.
There's a lot.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to it, and that's why we'll keep having these conversations. And like you said, to be having these kinds of conversations, that's the key to not only me succeeding, but our audience members succeeding, and people of various walks of life being able to succeed with their dreams and the things that they want to do. So thank you so much. So where would you like people to connect to you, if you would like that?
You can connect to me on Instagram at Brenda A. Gilbert.
Great. And I'm Scott K. Weiser on Instagram. I have scottweiser.com/follow is my email list. I'll have all those links down in the show notes. And thank you everybody for being here, and we look forward to the next episode.
Thank
which
you
will be actually with Robert Kondo. He co-founded Tonko House, and they've done some really remarkable projects. And I also will be able to post the videos, I think, from the panels I moderated at CTNX. So, yeah, sorry I interrupted you. You were saying goodbye.
I was saying thank you.
Yes, and thank you. Take care. You have been watching the Directing Animation Livecast, hosted by Scott Weiser, produced by Lauren Chaikin, copyright Scott Weiser, LLC, 2019.